So, the future of business. There's an old Chinese adage that says, in times of great winds, some build bunkers and others build windmills. And we are living in these times of great winds. Winds of change are blowing through us, challenging the very structures and strictures by which we operate and organize. Put simply, business as usual is no longer an option. This now trendy managerial acronym, VUCA, that we've heard at this conference a few times, describes this business context. We're not just dealing with transformation, we're dealing with unceasing transformation. And there are a plethora of different business drivers, a maelstrom of motifs, from the kind of disruptive technology end, Internet of Things, 3D printing, open source, Creative Commons, right through to this shift towards more values-led, purposeful, essentially soulful organizations. And in the midst of all this, there is a profound shift happening that's challenging you and I at deep and partly unconscious levels. It's what Peter Senge, the management guru from MIT, refers to when he says that the number one most important thing facing you and I today as leaders and change agents of our organizations is a fundamental shift in logic, a shift in ways of thinking, from a reductive, narrowing down, constricting, atomizing, fragmenting, mechanistic perspective, to a recognition that our organizations are living beings immersed within the living systems of society, immersed within the living systems of the more than human world. It's what I refer to as a shift from a firm of the past to a firm of the future. These top-down, hierarchic, siloed, command and controlled, KPI-obsessed organizations that you and I are fully experienced in, to these firms of the future, living emergent, distributed, decentralized, locally attuned teams of people dealing with this unceasing transformation without having to rely on these hierarchies of bureaucracy and control. It's a fundamental shift. And this concept of a metamorphosis in nature, and we like the beautiful one from a caterpillar to a butterfly for obvious reasons, speaks to us at many levels and talks to what we're dealing with. The early stages of that metamorphosis, the caterpillar undergoes a breakdown phase. And in the midst of that breakdown phase, these imaginal cells that are always present within the caterpillar, always present within our own human systems and our organizations, begin to form imaginal groupings, clusters. But the caterpillar, still inured in yesterday's logic, sees these as a threat to the status quo and undermines them with vital energy, antibodies and so forth, slowing down the metamorphic process. But then a tipping point is reached. It's as if a threshold begins to be crossed within the consciousness of the caterpillar, within the consciousness of our own organizations and human systems, when these groupings are seen for what they really are, prototyping the future. And with that, vital energy is used to support them rather than undermine them. And quite quickly, the metamorphic process unfolds. We are in the midst of crossing this threshold. By the way, the origins of the word leadership find themselves in the old European word leith, which means to cross the threshold. It's asking us all to be leaders in these times. And the more conscious you and I can be of these profound shifts that are happening, that are challenging our belief systems, our worldviews, the more successful you and I will be at helping our organizations not just build bunkers and survive, but to truly thrive in the volatile times ahead. So let me give you a couple of examples. There are a plethora, it seems like all these disparate initiatives, these conferences and think tanks, purposeful business, inclusivity, mindfulness in the workplace, millennials, CSR, and so forth. And they can seem like almost disparate initiatives vying for our attention, yet they are all symptomatic of this deeper underlying shift. So let's take CSR. It's been around for a few years. To start off with, it was kind of treated as a bolt-on to business as usual. Now, leading companies like Interface, for instance, are really getting to grips with how to mainstream that into the heart and soul of the organization. And at the surface of the wave, that's about efficiencies and effectiveness, getting a handle on our carbon waste and water, measuring, monitoring, controlling, and reducing our externalities. And that's all good stuff, and we need that. But when we really get into it, when we really roll up our sleeves and get busy with what it means to be a truly sustainable business, then we start taking inspiration from living systems, like biomimicry, cradle to cradle, industrial ecology, closed-loop economics, closed-loop thinking where the waste of one output becomes the input of another. And that's just not about our resources, that's about the way that we engage as human beings, our information flows, stakeholder engagement, and so forth. And the more that we engage in that, the more that we come up with new ways of delivering value, we start buffering up against yesterday's logic, essentially a take, make, waste, linear way of dealing with things that is still ingrained in all of our businesses. We still regurgitate it at our business schools today. And the more we get with that, the more we have these kind of prototyping groupings of people, key decision makers in different parts of the business, starting to think differently, thinking out of the box, starting to question that yesterday's logic. And actually saying, hang on a minute, can we not be doing more than just reducing our negative impact as an organization? Aren't we as human beings able to do more than reduce our carcinogenic effect on life? Can our organizations be creating the conditions conducive for life, actually enhancing the livelihood of all species, ourselves and our children? And of course, we all know we can be. And we start questioning. And with that, we start forming these groupings, prototyping the future. And these thresholds begin to be crossed. Another example, mindfulness in the workplace, or millennials, dealing with that. The surface of the way, that's efficiencies and effectiveness again, getting a handle on our human resources, ensuring our people are equipped to deal with these challenging times, being more resilient whilst getting a handle on mental illness and stress. And that's all really good stuff. We need to do that. But when we really get to grips with it, when we bring in these contemplative practices and try and mainstream them into how you and I are being in the workplace, then we come face to face with our own masks, our own narrowing down, constricting perspectives, which keep us inured in this logic. And the more that we're serious about these contemplative practices, the more that we can allow ourselves to start dissolving these masks. And that can resonate with findings that we're coming across in neuroplasticity, in brain, heart, gut, in quantum physics, in depth psychology, and facilitation ecology, how nature really works beyond this kind of idea of dog-eat-dog social Darwinism. And it starts provoking us into a deeper philosophical, yet no less practical inquiry about why am I here? Who am I? Can the organization resonate with what I'm truly about, with what I'm trying to find and flow with? If I realize my creative potential at work to allow my work to become a form of love in action, can that organization hold that? Can the organization actually be serving life? Interesting. This is what we're dealing with in these transformative times. So this is obviously big stuff, and I'd like to sort of bring it down to two levels, one around personal gnosis and one around organizational gnosis. And I use that word gnosis. It's not exactly a very common word. Could have used transformation. So the ancient Greeks, who are at the foundation of our Western civilization, understood what it meant to truly know. First off, to truly know ourselves, and then to bring in our ways of knowing into how we are attending with each other. That's what gnosis is. Carl Jung talked about 4 ways of knowing: intuitive, rational, emotional, somatic. Bringing those together, that's what we humans do naturally. The great news here is we're just opening up to who we truly are. That's what gnosis is. So, a couple of examples. Sensing. Being able to sense and respond in our workplaces, to truly tune in to what's going on, to allow this collective intelligence to emerge. A company called Sounds True, a media company in North America. Beginning of every meeting, they have a minute's silence. So can you imagine in your organizations, I know you're tired now, but imagine on Monday morning in your organizations, a minute's silence at the beginning of every meeting. And we have been facilitated in how to attend in that minute's silence. Not to fill it with our masturbating monkey minds, or to fill it with thoughts of how I can get my point across in the meeting, as effective as that may seem to yesterday's logic, but to actually empty ourselves, to allow these deeper ways of knowing to cohere in us, so that we can be in service of the meeting, which is in service of the organization, rather than being beholden to our egos. We have these powerful tools that can get in the way if we're not careful. They're great for getting the job done, for doing the to-do lists, for engineering solutions. But when we allow that way of attending to dominate, it crowds out our other ways of knowing. Albert Einstein, the great genius, put his finger right on it when he said, "The intuitive mind is a sacred gift. The rational mind, its faithful servant." We have created a society that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. We are living in organizations, we are living in societies that have created situations where this way of attending, this very useful tool, is running the show. It's great and it's useful, but it's crowding out our other ways of knowing, to the point now that we have a system that is largely cut adrift from any deeper sense of meaning or purpose. Enter this contagion of consumerism in our midst. It's utterly bizarre. A couple of other examples. And all of these things interrelate. So once you start working on any of these, they will start emerging. So what we're in essence talking about is creating soulful organizations where we can allow our humanity to come through. And Parker J. Palmer, the leadership specialist, said that the soul is like a wild creature in the woods. And we, searching for our purposeful businesses, go crashing into the woods with these torches strapped to our forehead, searching for the soul, and it just flees. We need to be creating an environment where that soul feels comfortable in coming out. These sacred spaces that was talked about earlier, that Dan was talking about, creating spaces in our environment. Simple stuff, small steps. What Mother Teresa says. On the one hand, this is about prototyping, learning to fail fast, the kind of Silicon Valley way of doing business. But on the other hand, it's a way of being. And that's what Mother Teresa talks to when she says, we can't do great things. We can only do small things with great love. Love's not a word we hear much of in business circles these days. The small things. We need the top-down mission statements. We need the drive. We need that, but we also need the small steps, the way in which you and I communicate. If we're really honest with ourselves, how often do you and I truly listen to the other person, whether it be in a corridor or in a boardroom or at this conference? If we check ourselves for a moment, we truly tune in with all of our awareness and listen to the other person. Because when we do, that other person, either consciously or unconsciously, will sense something, and they will drop their guard a little, and they will start communing. That's what communication is about, to commune with. We need to get back to that and be radical here, get to the root of things. So an organization I've had the pleasure of engaging with, a supermarket here in London, they have, every few weeks, they get a group of people together, and bear in mind that these people, different people from the shop floor and so forth, are many different cultures, sometimes English is their second or third language, have a half-day workshop. Nothing complicated here, zero budget, by the way. There is no need to spend any money on this stuff. We get them in a room, and we sit round in a circle. Talking stick. When I'm talking, I know that no one's going to interrupt me. And I take personal responsibility for speaking about how I'm feeling from the heart. Not about over there or blaming them, speaking about me, what's going on for me in the workplace. And everybody else in that circle takes personal responsibility for truly listening from their heart, catching themselves when they're caught up in thoughts of past and future, or when they're trying to rehearse what they should say when the stick comes to them. So that we're bringing that contemplative stillness, that presence, into the movement, into how we're being in the workplace. Simple thing, profound things happen every time we do it, every time it's done. Because people, you and I, are not used to being listened to and speaking in such an open-hearted way. So far we've become from purpose. And the insight that bubbles up, people coming up with solutions about challenges in the workplace, and the innovation that people are totally bought into, and the level of trust and embodied culture that then goes out into the shop floor that customers can detect, suppliers can tune into. It's there, it's real. This is the front line of purposeful business. Celebration. Creating a culture that celebrates our qualities of humanity. Yes, we have base natures. Yes, we can be hyper-competitive and short-termist and greedy and selfish. You know, we all know Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we also have the innate capacity to want to love and be loved and relate with, and reciprocity that was mentioned earlier by HSBC. We all have these. We're biophilic creatures, that we love life. And if we can create a culture that enhances those rather than rewarding the others, then we're going a long way to purposeful business. Again, a simple example. French manufacturer, Favi. They have at the beginning of every meeting, imagine again in your organizations on Monday morning, the beginning of every meeting, a circle, a little round robin, and people volunteer stories about, I'd like to thank someone for reaching across what they did, that small thing that they did, or did you know what our customer did? Or little stories that share anecdotes about people reaching across their own egos in service to something else. Simple stuff, zero budget, creating positive vortices in the organization. The good news is we now have loads of different examples, and we've heard many of these today. Teva, for instance, HSBC, Interface, different sectors that we can take inspiration from here in 2015. On the one hand, we've got companies like Interface that we've just heard from and Kingfisher who are doing really great work, getting to grips with what it means to be regenerative, to create value for all of our stakeholders, to turning our externalities into opportunities. And then you move into companies like Natura, big organizations with thousands of employees signing up to being B Corps, legally changing their constitution so they are beholden not just to short-term profit maximization for shareholders, but to creating value for all of their stakeholders, including society and the environment. Now, over 1,500 companies signed up to that worldwide. It's a fast movement. Right through to companies that are radically changing the way in which they organize. There's the Brazilian manufacturer, Semco, multi-million-dollar operation that's gone from 12 levels of hierarchy down to 3. Got rid of its HR department completely. Everybody takes personal responsibility for their own jobs, for how much they're getting paid. When there's promotions, we have peer reviews and 360-degree feedback and panels. Imagine that kind of transparency in your organization when we all know how much everyone else is getting paid. We have to question why we don't have that level of transparency. IKEA, a well-known example, coming up with a global logistics strategy for delivering their products in different ways around the world. Old school thinking would take a few months to come up with a strategy, then the implementation plan, and sign it off and so forth. New way, 3 days. 3 half-day workshops, get a load of people together, brainstorm, deep listening techniques, facilitated well with customers and suppliers, come up with a strategy, an implementation plan, people personally bought into it, signed off, ready to go. And there's this example I came across, fascinating example of a network of legal companies in Canada that have brought into the center of their decision-making process what is called the children's fire. It's an ancient indigenous practice that they actually learned from Mac from Embercombe here in England, which means that every time that we make a change to our strategy or to our operations, we consider the impact that that is having on the livelihood of our children. Now, in these ancient communities, it was the next 7 generations, and that's way too much for us to try and get our short-termist minds around. So just thinking about the impact it has on our children has a transformative effect, opens up our perceptual horizon. I can hear the old logic coming in now, going, hang on a minute, we're dealing with these increasingly challenging times. We need to focus relentlessly on the bottom line. What on earth are we doing talking about children in the boardroom? Come on, please. And then there's new logic coming in, these organizations that have started grappling with that, fundamentally changing the way that they are as companies, from being seen as legal, as kind of like necessary evil, dealing with disputes in a certain conflictual way, to actually now being seen as strategic stakeholders, working with their domestic and corporate law partners in a radically different way because they've opened up their lens. And then there's the other perspective that sees the wood from the trees and kind of questions, what kind of organization is it that I work for? What kind of society is it that I vote for and contribute to that doesn't value the livelihoods of our own children? So I'd like to summarize with a couple of films. Hands up who's seen the film The Matrix? Wow. What about Shawshank Redemption? Okay. Well, these films and others like them speak to something deep within us. They have these cult followings. Within each and every one of us, we all have a soul calling. It's part of what makes us human. And what we may begin to realize is what prevents us from fully living, from fully loving, from fully realizing our creative potential in our workplaces, are habituated, narrowing down, ingrained, acculturated perspectives that keep us inured in this illusion of separation, fear, and control. We are our own jail makers and our own jailbreakers. Bob Marley said, "None but ourselves can free our minds, emancipate ourselves from mental slavery." What an exciting time to be involved in the future of business, to be involved in internal communications, to transform our organizations, to become human in a firm of the future, to walk the path with small steps with great love. And so I'll finish today on a quote from the French philosopher Marcel Proust, who says, "The greatest voyage of our lifetimes is not in the seeking of new landscapes, but in the seeing with new eyes." Thank you very much for your kind attention today.